Welcome to another episode of the Shanaplan. My name is Kyle Posey. Jumping the gun as always. This is episode number 85, depending on when you started to root for the 49ers. That could be George Kittle. That could be Vernon Davis. That could be Brandon Lloyd, who fantastic receiver. He just makes some spectacular catches. I will never let that go. Akash joins me as always. Akash, how's it going, man?
I'm doing fantastic, KP. And as George Kittle always says, can you smell what the Niners are cooking?
Wow. We got WrestleMania this week. I wonder if he's going to be there. I know he's a big wrestling guy with a little wrestling reference. I'm going there. I don't know why, but a lot of my friends go every year. And I'm just tagging along, man, going to Dallas. What are you up to? What have you been up to? What's new with you, man?
Nothing much. You think, when the NFL offseason hits, you just get a little bit more time to do like other things, and it's starting to get a little bit warmer, so you start to play a little bit more golf. And then the NFL offseason just doesn't slow down. I mean, it's just been one thing after the other. Got the draft coming up in 3 weeks, just year round.
I went to a spring training game yesterday, so that was fun. That's what I'm going to be doing. A lot of getting outside, like you said. Probably not much golf, but let's talk about 49ers because that's what we do here. So the NFL owners meetings are going on, and as most of you know by now, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan both spoke. So we're going to talk about some of the quotes, some of the comments, and what that means for the 49ers, what part of their words we can take at face value and which ones have some substance. So let's start with the offers that the team has hypothetically, supposedly, depending on who you speak to, received for Jimmy Garoppolo. So we heard back around February, the middle of February, and whether that was Pro Football Talks, Mike Florio, or Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer, they were telling us that, and actually I should qualify there. I should make this clear. So John Lynch was telling people, according to Mike Florio, that he had been receiving 2 twos for Jimmy Garoppolo. We don't know when that timeline is. So I think that's important to, just to get out there. That could have been when the team initially made the trade for Trey Lance. That could have been at the beginning of February and last month. And the reason that it's easy to believe that, that report was true is because Albert Breer was saying a lot of the same things. So for starters, Lynch came out and said, we haven't received a firm offer for Jimmy G. So when you read that, when you hear that, we haven't received a firm offer, does that mean that offer never came out? Like that was just not true at all? Or is it one of those, they were getting calls about Jimmy G and none of the offers that the 49ers received really kind of moved the needle enough for them to obviously move on from Jimmy?
I mean, what does that term firm offer even mean, right? This isn't like putting an offer in on a house where you got to fill out a bunch of paperwork and it's written out and people got to sign it, right? These are conversations over the phone. These are conversations in person at the combine, conversations over text, etc. And so maybe teams, the two teams are discussing and some terms were thrown around of like, hey, we're looking for this. What can you offer, etc. So I don't know what, when John Lynch says a firm offer wasn't made, I'm not sure what he's referring to versus when Mike Florio, reports that John Lynch said he had, this offer in hand as he was telling other teams. So there's a lot of like conflicting reports going, but the theme that was consistent between Breer and Florio was that the 49ers valued Jimmy Garoppolo at 2 second-round picks, which makes sense given last offseason what Sam Darnold went for, what Carson Wentz went for both offseasons. It makes sense, right? Is that, that's where the 49ers potentially value Garoppolo at. But what I do believe is that once Jimmy Garoppolo announced that he was having shoulder surgery, and that happened, early March, right before free agency, the offers probably went away. I imagine at that time, no team was legitimately interested in making a trade for him, just because of the fact that his rehab was 16 weeks. He wasn't going to participate in organized team activities in May. He wasn't going to throw until training camp. And so what team was really going to give up anything of value for, trading for a player that's in a contract year and that's injured right now? So that part I believe, but I'm sure at some point or the other before that surgery, there were some legitimate discussions between teams and the 49ers that probably just didn't materialize because of the shoulder surgery.
Right. And another thing that has to be brought up is when we're talking about all these quarterback moves, the other quarterbacks that were involved besides Jimmy. So in January, just during the playoffs, we're thinking that Jimmy's probably going to get moved because there weren't many other quarterbacks that were going to be available on the market. And then Tom Brady unretires, and then Deshaun Watson, who was always going to be available in my mind this offseason, he becomes available. Like that's an actual tangible thing. And then Baker comes out of nowhere. Then Russell Wilson, that was real. And I think a lot of people thought he would return to Seattle. So that took Denver out of the market. And remember, John Lynch and John Elway have plenty of ties together. And I know John Elway's not the guy anymore, but look at they've already had signed a couple players the Broncos have that were former 49ers. So I feel like that would have been an easy connection there. And then, of course, Matt Ryan, he crossed the Colts off the list as a potential Jimmy G suitor. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 quarterbacks right there.
Carson Wentz.
Sorry, 5 quarterbacks. Yeah, and then Wentz.
That really built up as the season went on.
We Martin Mayhew, the Washington Commanders general manager, worked with the 49ers, with the 49ers when Jimmy Garoppolo was there. So that's another another team that we took off the list. So that's 6 quarterbacks right there that Jimmy was also battling with. And Baker's still available. And now there's the Panthers. Who else at this time actually needs a quarterback? It doesn't seem like anybody
Seattle,
else.
maybe.
Yeah, and Seattle, like there are teams that could still use Jimmy's services, but that's probably not going to be until after the draft to see if they really do like one of these quarterbacks. But it's going to be a wait and see type of thing. And I don't think that's much of a surprise considering what you mentioned, his shoulder injury. He had shoulder surgery. He's not going to be able to throw for a long, long time, man. And considering OTAs, considering minicamp, like he's going to miss some important events on the NFL calendar that might not seem important for us, but that's when you build a continuity with your teammates. You want to be around the building. We just saw a picture of Russ throwing to his teammates a week ago or so. And as corny and awkward as it was because he had a helmet on, that's still what these guys do, man. So Jimmy's going to miss out on a lot of events like that. So it's understandable that teams haven't moved on from him. But the question is, so why won't the 49ers just release him? And that's been a big talking point because that $25 million, 49ers probably could have used that. Not only now, they can use it in the future. We talked about a little bit before. Can you just mention the injury guarantee? Because I feel like not enough people are aware exactly what that is.
Right. So Jimmy Garoppolo has a $25.5 million cap hit this season for the 49ers. If the 49ers were to release him, and when you release a player, they have to pass a physical when they cut him. And so say he passes the physical and is healthy, the 49ers would only hold a dead cap hit of $1.4 million, and they would get, the $25 million back, right? That's remaining. But if he were to fail a physical, then they would be on the hook for $7.5 million, which is the injury guarantee that KP just brought up. And this is a kicker in his contract that triggered back in 2019. So the kicker in his contract was basically in 2019 and 2020, if the 49ers made the NFC Championship game or the Super Bowl, then Jimmy Garoppolo would be guaranteed $7.5 million for injury in the 2022 season. And, these are standard terms that are put into contracts between agents and teams. They negotiate all of these things, so it's well beyond just the guaranteed money and, annual average salary, all that stuff. And so good on Don Yee for negotiating that in. And so now if the 49ers were to release Jimmy Garoppolo, he's obviously unhealthy. He's had the shoulder surgery. He's going to fail a physical. The 49ers would really only gain $18 million of cap space. They would owe Jimmy Garoppolo $7.5 million. And it's our understanding that if Garoppolo signs with a new team when he does get healthy in a few months, the 49ers would then get that $7.5 million guarantee back. So he can't double dip, which at one point I thought was possible, but I guess there's some offset language in the contract that doesn't allow for that. So good on the 49ers for putting that into place. But that's part of the reason why I think the 49ers won't cut Jimmy Garoppolo. I think the other half is that they truly believe that once he gets healthy, that there's a chance that they can still trade him for, some potential draft pick. Now, who knows what that is? Who knows, where the destination is? Maybe they have some wink thing with Carolina. Maybe they are banking on another quarterback injury like Teddy Bridgewater's a few years ago, which seems unlikely, but I think they're just kind of holding out hope because right now the 49ers aren't, at a deadline with Jimmy Garoppolo's $25.5 million salary. That salary doesn't become guaranteed till week 1 of the season. I don't think it's preventing them from signing anybody right now because I don't think they're legitimately interested in signing any of the free agents that are available on the market. They're not going to sign Nick Bosa and Deebo Samuel to extensions right now. That typically happens later in the summer. So they're just kind of in a holding pattern, and they're just going to let Jimmy Garoppolo get healthy and then kind of see what happens from there.
I wonder how much the whole do right by Jimmy message is tied into that $7.5 million cap space. And I feel like it is. I just feel like it's – I know that, they always say the right things. Kyle Shanahan just said, we love him as a person. He's a great teammate. But that's a lot of money, man. And in a business, there's no way that you can just ignore that much money. So I don't know. That just in my mind, that's tough to ignore. But as you said, there's a good chance that when it's all said and done, they get exactly what they want. And when I say that, I don't mean they'll get 2 2s, but they could get a legit day 2 pick, maybe another pick. That doesn't mean Trey Lance is going to miss any reps because, again, Jimmy's not going to be able to throw. So this offseason is going to be operating as Lance's QB1, and he's going to have a chance to, grow and learn with his teammates, and that does matter. So a lot of this is just, a lot of this is just talk right now, and I understand the frustration from a lot of fans when they see – because John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, they're getting asked these questions. Hey, if Jimmy's on the roster in training camp, is he going to compete? Well, yeah, if he's on the roster, Kyle Shanahan has no other choice to say that he's going to compete. So,
yeah. The other thing is from a leverage standpoint, you can't just say, oh, yeah, when Jimmy Garoppolo gets healthy, we're going to cut him. Because then you lose all trade leverage because say there is an interested party, why would that interested team, trade a draft pick? Why wouldn't they just wait for the 49ers to release him? Which I still think is kind of the problem. So you need more than one suitor, which is why I think the 49ers are holding out hope that something else happens between now and July in order to move Garoppolo. But yeah, and from a cap space standpoint, it's pretty clear that they value that potential draft pick in return over freeing up the $18 million at this moment. Because we've talked about this. I think there's other avenues to open up money if you wanted to sign, free agent X, for instance, right?
And they've already done that.
So, there's a Jimmy Ward extension. There's restructures you could potentially do to a Trent Williams or a Fred Warner. I think there's other potential trades you can make on the roster to free up some cap space. Maybe an Alex Mack retires. We'll talk about that in a bit. But there's other avenues that don't involve just releasing Jimmy Garoppolo, and they, hold true to whatever the value is. And, when they do hit a deadline, right, whether that's training camp or whether that's week 1 of the season, when that salary becomes guaranteed, then at that point, I think they'll be forced to make a decision and release him. But I don't think we can criticize them quite yet on keeping him until they actually keep him, if that makes sense.
Right. No, and it does. And again, it's the off season, so it's easy to, take these words and think, well, he's still on the roster right now in March. He's probably still going to be on the roster then, but there's a long time to go. We have a long ways to go for that to all come true. I think one thing that was consistent with both Lynch and Shanahan is that they didn't exactly name Trey Lance the starter, and that's probably another reason why it's easy to be worried. Is he going to be on the roster? Why wouldn't they name Trey the starter? So here's some of Kyle Shanahan's quotes who spoke on Tuesday. He said, that's why we looked into trading Jimmy, because we obviously believe Trey can be the starter and we're ready to do that. But if we can't upgrade our team in another way, we're not just going to get rid of a good quarterback because we have other quarterbacks on the roster. And he went on to just talk about how quarterbacks are hard to come by. And I think he kept hammering home, we want to upgrade our team. So we want to use essentially the picks that we are going to get with Jimmy on other pieces to build the roster. So that was kind of interesting to keep hammering home that point. And another part where other words that Kyle Shanahan said that, is pretty common sense is the surgery. He said, we can't upgrade our team by still getting him picks until people feel good about his surgery. And I'm all right with that. So by that, he's saying like the team's just going to be patient. And again, there's no real reason for them not to. To make a panic move right now would probably meaning they're going to lose out on like who knows? Let's say hypothetically they end up getting a third-round pick for Jimmy Garoppolo. If they were to trade for him now, they're not going to get a third-round pick. If they were, I would imagine he would not be on the roster. So again, patience and think about what can happen around the NFL. Like a guy could retire. Who knows who that is? But, a guy could retire, get hurt. Injuries, of course, happen at quarterback. So I don't think the 49ers' hands are necessarily tied. It's just that they won't be able to make a move right now. And in today's world, everybody wants now, instant results. And because that's not the case, it's easy to look down on them. I still believe, though, that they did fumble this situation, and not because he's on the roster like as of today. It's because they didn't do anything right away. I think the easiest way would have been to just cut your losses right away. And cut your losses is probably a bad way to put it, because I think at his highest would have probably been last year. If the NFL had a different view from last offseason to this offseason, and I know that he had the shoulder surgery, I feel like the 49ers would have probably been able to move him even leading up to that, because, again, they made the NFC Championship. But the fact that they weren't receiving the offers that they would have liked, because Lynch did talk about how they were receiving quote-unquote offers but no firm offers, that kind of tells you what the league feels about Jimmy G's value and not necessarily what the 49ers.
I also think his value would have been maybe not as low, but he only played in 6 games or 7 games in 2020. So it's not like he was a healthy starter for 16 games in 2020. So he's coming off of an injury-riddled season then, and he had 2 years of team control, so maybe that helped. There was less quarterback movement, so there was less potential options to send him to. Right. I also think it showed exactly, it shows how the team viewed Trey Lance going into last season, because I pulled a quote from the post-draft press conference when Kyle Shanahan spoke about Jimmy Garoppolo, and he basically said, Jimmy's going to, be our starter headed into training camp. If Trey comes along and it's a competition, but right now it's not, right? Whereas this year, his tone's a lot different. It's, we tried to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. We want Trey Lance to be our starter sooner than later. And I think just that change in demeanor should calm 49ers fans down, at least for the time being, because I think their mindset of who they think should be playing has internally changed between last offseason and that, this offseason. And that just speaks to Trey Lance's development. And now he's going to have OTAs to, be the starter. He's going to be taking all the first team reps, more or less. And then when training camp rolls around, we'll see kind of what the dynamic is between the two, if even Jimmy Garoppolo's on the roster at that point. And then we'll kind of go from there. But I don't think they've made up their mind on what they're going to do. I think they're just going to, let him get healthy and then just kind of see what happens.
So another reason that we can probably cement Trey Lance as a starter next season is not only did they hire Brian Griese, but the way that Kyle Shanahan spoke about Griese. So again, like when we know Griese, if you're old enough to watch him at Michigan, like that's probably your last memory of him playing football. Like sure, he played in the NFL for a little bit, but he's been visible to us on the TV. So as an analysis, yes, you're, or an analyst, you're aware that Brian Griese has takes, but as a coach, like we don't know anything about him. So Kyle Shanahan spoke about this on Tuesday morning at the NFL owners meeting, and he said, I personally think he was the smartest football player I've ever been around. The way that he prepares, how organized he was, as detailed as a guy as I've ever been around. And I thought he was a guy who could bring something different to the quarterback position. The 49ers are going to have something different at the quarterback position. So tying into Trey Lance, and then he specifically names Trey here. So he said, quote, I love that Trey has someone who's been through the battle. I can tell him about what he's seen with these guys, but someone who's actually had to go through ups and downs and that pressure, having a good game, throwing a pick, how to deal with the media, how to deal with the NFL season. It's hard to find a player that's done it at such a high level, unquote. So that right there tells us that, it kind of gives Trey Lance like somebody different to lean on, and not so much in the X's and O's world, but again, everything outside of that, which is exactly what I just named. So that's interesting. And I don't know if you have any takes on Brian Griese, but I'm kind of interested to see how hands-on he's going to be, and I guess how much credit he gets for Trey Lance's development. And I guess if there is any, for lack thereof, if there isn't any development, how much falls on Griese.
I mean, it was impossible to know what Brian Griese was going to be like as a coach when he got hired. So it was impossible to have a take like, oh man, he's going to be a fantastic coach. This was a fantastic hire. It was, I just called it like an out of box hire, right? Out of the box hire, because you could have gone the traditional quarterback coach route where maybe someone was let go around the NFL and you could hire like a retread or hire someone out of college that has coached the position, right? But they chose to go a little out of the box. They hired a former quarterback that was a former analyst, hasn't coached quarterbacks ever. And I think Kyle Shanahan views it more like a veteran backup quarterback who's basically, been through the NFL, knows what it's like, can, just be a mentor for Trey Lance, not necessarily, a fun, a Rich Scangarello type that's working through fundamentals or whatever the case is. I'm sure Brian Griese can, but it feels like his role is more so suited to be like a mentor. And I thought the interesting part of that is that Kyle Shanahan only mentioned Trey and not necessarily Trey and Jimmy, right? And when they overhauled the coaching staff this offseason, the offensive coaching staff, it felt like they brought a lot of elements that would highlight Trey Lance's success. Internally promoting Bobby Slowick, who's the passing game specialist, to be the passing game coordinator, bringing in Brian Griese as a mentor, bringing on Anthony Lynn to be a running backs coach who's been part of some successful run games in the NFL in the past, who's worked with mobile quarterbacks. It just feels like their plan going into the offseason was to put all their chips in on Trey Lance, which why wouldn't you? It makes sense. Whether it was with the coaches they hired, whether it was admitting that they were, looking to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. And unfortunately, some outside circumstances, didn't necessarily go their way. And maybe they overplayed their hand a little bit. And as a result, he's still on the roster. But I don't think that changes how they view Trey Lance. And this quote here that he mentions about Griese is, I think, representative of that.
All right, let's turn the page here and let's talk about some of the other positions. And it's the offseason when we're talking about somebody being in the best shape of their life, baby. And the 49ers, DJ Jones, no longer with us. Fun player. Still feel like we have not seen the best version of DJ Jones.
Best personality maybe on the team?
Fun for sure. There's no doubt about it, man. Just a real down-to-earth dude. So I think the 49ers were comfortable with letting DJ Jones is probably because they felt good about the health and the direction of Javon Kinlaw. So Kyle Shanahan spoke about this and he said, this is the healthiest I've seen him since he's been here. That's a great sign. How much that actually means, we will see. But he said that, I see Javon Kinlaw every day working outside my window. And that visual, like to be able to see that firsthand probably means a lot for them. And he's going to, he needs to be good. Like they need him to play for this defense to kind of, be at that elite level, especially as a running team. So I don't think people give their run defense enough credit. Like we always talk about the sacks and the pressures that they have, but their defensive line was nasty last year. And DJ Jones had a big reason why, because if you look at the ESPN's run stop win rate, he was number one. He was comfortably number one too. I believe he had his percentage was a few percentage points higher than second place and even third place Eric Armstead. So they had the top three guys. And if Kinlaw, I'm not saying he's going to be number one, but if he can be anywhere near that, they will just have a good chance of being just having another dominant season. So how much of this can we take away from Kinlaw, or how much of this is just word service, a lip service, I guess? But big guys, the guys who are usually the size of Javon Kinlaw don't tend to bounce back, and just get healthy all of a sudden. So that's something to keep an eye on. Obviously talented dude, man. They're going to need him, as I said, but are you buying this?
A little bit. I feel like Kyle Shanahan wouldn't sell us, a complete lie in terms of Javon Kinlaw, especially when asked about it. It felt like he went out of his way to say that, hey, I look out of my window, out of my office every day, and I see him there. And that's one thing I felt like we took away from Kinlaw's rookie season, that it felt like even in the offseason, he was always in the Bay Area. He was always at the facility, always working out. Just unfortunate that his, knee injuries have kind of bothered him throughout his career so far. So hopefully this ACL surgery that he had, the same doctor that treated Nick Bosa's knees, the same person that did the surgery for Javon Kinlaw. And I heard Javon Kinlaw also, I think, went through the same rehab process or, went through the same rehab facility that Nick Bosa did initially right after the ACL surgery. So hopefully that's a sign of what's to come. But I think the other half, the glass half empty side, is that he's a big dude, and coming off of knee surgery, just a little worried about his athleticism, what that's going to look like, what his burst is going to be like. But I think that's kind of just a wait and see. I think it gives you a little bit of optimism that they didn't necessarily sign anyone to replace DJ Jones or overpay to keep him, because that probably shows you that, okay, hey, they have some belief in his ability to replace DJ Jones. But, for where they drafted him at this point, if you're able to just get, DJ Jones level production out of him, I think you'd be thrilled, just given where they drafted him that high.
Yeah, 100%, man. It seems like that's a little bit of a low bar considering, how high they did take him and considering who he's replacing. So DeForest Buckner was not just a run stuffer. DeForest Buckner got after the quarterback time and time again. So to live up to that draft status, to live up to a top 15 pick, which Kinlaw is, he is going to have to develop. I'm not saying he has to be like a 10, 15 sack guy, but he should consistently be a guy who is constantly getting pressure and getting after the quarterback. And that has yet to happen because we have not seen him on the field. So it'll be a wait and see for Kinlaw. Easy guy to root for, man. Whenever he speaks to the media, he always has some quirky things to say. Okay, now let's go to the other side of the ball in the trenches before we get out of here. Aaron Banks, Jaylon Moore, those are two guys who we're probably going to compete for, whether it's left guard, whether it's right guard, whether it's right tackle, who knows in Moore's case. But it seems like Aaron Banks is going to be the left guard moving forward. So that we didn't know what side he was going to play last year. But when the team drafted Aaron Banks in the second round in 2021, it was probably a sign that Laken Tomlinson was going to be out the door. And that came to fruition. Sure enough, they're going to get a comp pick for it. So it seems like good business because we talked about this. Good organizations, they don't wait until you have a hole. You fill that a year in advance. You just draft, develop. If you don't want to pay them at the end of the contract, then you let them leave for a comp pick, wash, rinse, repeat. That's how that kind of works. But Shanahan actually spoke about Aaron Banks, and he said, quote, "If you had asked me halfway through the season if he was going to be playing, I would have said yes. And things are starting to click for our team, and we didn't want to mess it up. But he's ready to go," end quote. So I think that is pretty telling, just that Banks came along, and he talked about, Shanahan that is, talked about Banks as a starter, or sorry, not a starter, but just as a player of where he was before the season started. He needed to cut weight. He needed to get used to how often the 49ers make their linemen run. Banks was not used to that. And for him to come a long way in 4 or 5 months is a pretty good sign, because no matter what we think of him, like Daniel Brunskill, I don't know if competent's the right word. I feel like he's close to competent, but there are others, in the playoffs, for example, every time when he goes against a capable defensive tackle who's even slightly above average, he just struggles mightily with them. And I don't think that's going to be the same thing with Aaron Banks, because he's not an undrafted AAF guy who's, a journeyman essentially. Like, he has the talent. So I think that was probably really good news if you're a 49ers fan and you want to hear something about Banks, like where he's at in his development. Of course, again, this is offseason, and it just could be lip service. We don't know if he's going to be the guy, but we will find out very soon. And I imagine he's going to get the first shot at left guard. Do you have high hopes for Aaron Banks?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, including myself at different points last season, you freak out because you're like, man, Aaron Banks, they drafted him in the 40s, and he isn't even dressing on game days. I mean, he's got a sweatshirt and sweatpants just like I do at home, watching from the sidelines. And so it makes you a little nervous. Like, they just watched this pick because we've seen that with the 49ers and offensive linemen like Josh Garnett from back in the day. Different regime, I get, and so that makes you a little worried. But then you realize, okay, you hear some quotes during the season that he's reshaping his body. I think his athleticism score coming into the draft wasn't particularly good. And 49ers have worked, on that, right? It was an interesting pick when they made it, right? Because they typically like offensive linemen that are a bit lighter on their feet to be able to execute the scheme that they want. And Banks was a heavier interior offensive lineman. So maybe it just has taken a year in order, for him to develop into that. And maybe they knew that going in. Maybe they knew that this was their Laken Tomlinson replacement, like you mentioned. Maybe they knew they were going to redshirt him. And, when you use a second round pick on a player, yeah, it's unfortunate for the fan base because they're like, man, this guy's not even playing. But, good
he
teams
sucks. He's a bust.
Yeah, exactly. And if he looks good this season, then their plan paid off because they were a good offensive line for the majority of the season last season, outside of some reps in the NFC title game, by Tom Compton and Dan Brunskill. But that was a good Rams defensive line, so it is what it is. But on the whole, their advanced metrics for the offensive line was pretty good. So maybe their plan worked, but we'll know
I
when
think
training camp hits, when OTAs hit, where Aaron Banks is. Because if he's starting out there with the ones next to Trent Williams, then you're like, okay, all right, they believe in him. They're letting him run with the ones. So we'll see.
I think that's more telling than any individual stat that you can have was when you're looking at the 49ers and whether it's, how successful they are on the ground or, how upright Jimmy G was kept last season. Like that means that they're a good unit. And in a Kyle Shanahan offense, you're not used to talking about individual players. Like even on their best teams with the Falcons, like you probably couldn't name who their guards were. You knew who Alex Mack was, but this is a unit. It's a cohesive unit and you need all five guys to be in sync. So that's all Banks has to do. He doesn't have to come in and be like a world beater by any means. He doesn't have to be an all-pro. He just needs to, keep guys in front of him, stay on his feet. Yeah, do the very basic one-on-one offensive line things, and Trey Lance will be fine. Right guard. So Brandon Brunskill is the current starter, as we said, but Shanahan kind of spoke about that. He didn't specifically say it, but he hinted at the fact that Jaylon Moore, who was the 5th-round pick last season, is going to compete at right guard. And I think that's pretty interesting. So it's not the same thing. A couple of years ago when they both came out of college, I thought that there was a good chance that Azeez Al-Shaair would be better than Jared Greenlaw just based on their profiles. I think the same when it comes to Moore and Banks. Banks is far more of a safer pick. He probably doesn't have the same type of flaws. He's played guard at a high level and played it for a long time. So because of that,
program.
Yeah, like Notre freaking Dame. Because of that, it's easy to look at him and say, oh, we can plug him in as an starter. So Jaylon Moore, I feel like, has a higher ceiling. With that comes a lower floor. We watched him a little bit last year, and he was pulled out of it. I think it was the Jags game just because he had a couple mental breakdowns on some plays. That, again, like day 3 pick, man, playing in the NFL, I don't care if it's against the Jags. I don't care if it's against the Rams. You're going to make mistakes. And because of that, he kind of lost his spot in the rotation. But I think he can be a player, man. I think he can really help the 49ers. He's an athlete. Like you can see when he was playing, when he moves, unlike most of the 49ers guards who have played. Even like Lakin, I think he moves better than him. He's crazy strength. So knowing that, and it's going to take him time just to figure out what he can and can't do. But I would not be surprised if 3-4 years from now, when it comes time to an extension, that Moore has a bigger contract than a guy like Aaron Banks, because again, Aaron Banks is more of a safe type of guy where I can see Jaylon Moore developing into like, whoa, like how did this guy fall to the 5th round of the NFL draft?
That's music to 49ers fans' ears because they've been just complaining about the right guard position for what feels like a few years now. So the interior offensive line certainly does have question marks, right? New starter at left guard, competition at right guard. Is Alex Mack coming back? John Lynch spoke about that yesterday, and he mentioned they believe Alex Mack is coming back. They believe he's been, staying in shape. He just got married in Ireland, so congratulations to Alex Mack and his new wife. I saw George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk were there, but that's also, a huge deal because Kyle Shanahan really values the center position, centers and tackles, right? They paid Weston Richburg a couple of years ago. That didn't work out because of injury. They went out and they signed veteran Alex Mack. So now what do? They haven't necessarily signed a replacement. So I wonder internally if they're looking at potentially drafting his replacement. I certainly would strongly consider that in the draft at some point this season, especially if they've got word that they know he's coming back. Or if he's thinking of retiring and he's kind of just playing the public, game like Joe Staley did. Maybe they've got another plan up their sleeves to look for a starter, but 3 new starters on the inside of that offensive line would be tough, especially with Trey Lance, really starting his first season as the starting quarterback.
Yeah, I would imagine that would throw the 49ers a wrench in their plans just because you're preparing for Banks to start. Maybe you hope that Moore starts. but you don't want to go into 2022 with 3 new starters in front of Trey Lance. You don't want to go from a 37-year-old to be center who has seen it all, who has, he's not going to be confused by any sort of look that the defense gives him, compared to what, a day 2, day 3 center, because they're not going to get like a Tyler Lindenbaum from Iowa since he's not going to fall. And just, I don't know, man. Knowing how important the center is in this offense, knowing that he makes a lot of the calls and takes a lot off the quarterback's plate, that would make, I don't know if that would make me feel worse about Trey Lance going into 2022, but I mean, just as a team in general, the last thing, again, you don't want 3 new starters. So that's something to keep an eye on. If we get news that, all of a sudden Alex Mack is not returning, because John Lynch said he's preparing as if he will, but that's not saying he's going to come back. So we'll see. It's definitely something to keep an eye on for sure. But I think that'll do it for us today. We're going to probably turn the page to more draft stuff, crank up the draft prospects and research, and try to dig into the players that the 49ers are interested in. Hopefully, as April's right around the corner, we see more and more player visits, see who they're interested in, that give us an idea of, it's probably not going to be that specific name, but we'll have an idea of what position. So center, that could be one.
Safety.
Yep, safety is a big one. I'm going to spend a lot of next week just watching safeties, see who they're interested in. John Lynch was at Penn State's Pro Day, and they have a really good safety in Jaquan Brisker. Ryan Carthen, we talked about that last week. He was at Nebraska's Pro Day, and they have a really good corner / safety, but they also have Cam Jurgens, who is probably one of the most athletic centers to come out of the NFL draft in the past couple of years. So a couple names to keep an eye on there. But again, we'll get there slowly but surely. So look forward to more draft breakdowns from my way coming up in April. Akash, what do you got going on?
Same thing, just more draft stuff. This year's, like we talked about, it's been a little different because they're picking 61, right? They've got a ton of mid-round picks, so it's a little bit easier it's a little bit more difficult to target a specific player and be like, that's the player they're going after, but it's a little bit easier to go for maybe a position group, like you said, so like safety, and just look at kind of who's going to be in that range, right, who they could potentially target. John Lynch and Adam Peters at that Penn State Pro Day was kind of interesting. And they had some good players, and so they're on the Pro Day circuit right now, just traveling to different schools to look at different players, and they'll have the top 30 visits, like you mentioned, over the next month, and the draft in about 3 weeks. So it's just go, and then as soon as the draft's over, you get to OTAs. So it's just nonstop. But that's what's coming from us. I don't know if you saw earlier today, Jalen Ramsey was on the Pivot podcast. He named Deebo Samuel one of the top 5 wide receivers in the league. I thought it was interesting. He had him ranked higher than Cooper Kupp and OBJ.
Oh, wow.
He said Devontae, Tyreek, and Deebo are tied for first. And then OBJ 4, and then I think Cooper Kupp 5.
I wonder how Cooper feels about OBJ being higher than him as his teammate.
And Deebo.
Yeah, right. So I wonder also how much of that is just impact, because I think Deebo came a long way this past season. Like, yeah, he had 1 billion yards, just all-purpose yards, and some of the things he did was unbelievable. Big play after big play, but I think he just grew as a route runner, and that is going to be important, especially, if they're going to use him down the field, which is something that we kind of saw a little bit this past season. So, yeah, I think I'm interested to see what Deebo's role is with Trey Lance and just the rest of the 49ers wide receivers as well, like how their offense kind of shifts and changes with Lance under center. And maybe there's more variance, maybe they're not as efficient, but I can imagine there are going to be big plays left and right. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I can only imagine that, Shanahan's going to be dialing up a bunch of gems with that. So, yeah, seeing Deebo deserves the credit. And I'm sure when he saw that, because, people were sending him, tagging it and sending to him, the first thing he said was like, or was thinking like, yeah, show Aaron Donald this. Like, I'm that guy, and Aaron needs to know this for sure.
I'm sure Aaron Donald's worried. I heard he's trying to get an extension right now. So I'm sure his first concern is Deebo Samuel. So, but nonetheless, you can find me at Twitter, AKSHANAVKP. Where can they find you on the social?
KP_show.
It's where the magic happens. That's episode 85, episode George Kittle. Once again, thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Niners Nation Podcast Network YouTube channel. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get it. Appreciate you for listening. Subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you so much, and go Niners.